What's up, everyone? This is Lucas Ross Sports, and you're watching my Lucas Ross Sports channel, and it's time for my top 4 college football playoff standings after week number 8 of the 2022 college football season. And how this video works, I give you the top 4 teams, and these are just based off of the team's performances this past weekend of their college football season. And I just give you my top 4 best teams. I mean, obviously, I made a little bit of a change here for this week's, top 4 teams. Last week, I had Ohio State, Georgia, Tennessee, and Michigan all in that top 4. I had Georgia at number 1, Ohio State at number 2, Michigan at number 3, and Tennessee at number 4. It's not going to be a big change here to the top 4, teams here in the standings, but there's a little bit of change into the standings. So let's just jump right into it here with our college football playoff standings. And the semifinal games, the number 1 versus number 4 seed will be held at the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. And then the number 2 versus number 3 seed will be the Verbo Fiesta Bowl. And this is simply not a prediction. This is simply a projection, based on how the season is going so far and how the teams are playing. If you go back to my prediction, a long time ago, I predicted Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Utah to be in those semifinal games. Utah is pretty much out of it. I mean, I still got, 3 of my picks right so far. But let's just jump right into it here. And the number 1 seed is going to be Georgia. I'm not changing my pick here for the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Georgia coming off a bye week this past weekend, so they'll be playing this weekend against Florida in Jacksonville. Georgia should go into that game and possibly, blow out Florida. I mean, Florida's not been all that, not been that decent team this year. They've just been an okay average team. But Florida also coming in after a bye week, and maybe they're better by the end of the season. But Georgia looks good. I mean, ever since that first game, Georgia has just been the dominant team in all of college football all year. I know they moved down, a couple spots, after those games against Kent State and Missouri, but they're back to where they need to be. I mean, this Georgia team looks like the same Georgia team as it was in the Oregon game in the first week of the season. So Georgia's my number 1 seed. Let's go to the number 2 seed. Who will play in the Verbo Fiesta Bowl? I had them here at number 2 last week. I'm not changing here on this pick. I have Ohio State at number 2. Ohio State had a big win against Iowa this past weekend. They'll play Penn State on the road this weekend. That is going to determine if Ohio State is probably a playoff contender or not, but I think Ohio State is legitimately a playoff contender automatically. I mean, they've had some, they haven't really played anybody tough this year. I mean, maybe Notre Dame was tough, but, they haven't really played a big, Big Ten opponent yet. I mean, they haven't played, Michigan yet. They'll get their first real test, though, I think, this weekend when they play Penn State on the road. So Ohio State has to still play Michigan on the schedule. But Ohio State, I think, the schedule really sets up nicely for them for the rest of the way. I know they had to play Michigan in the last game, but Ohio State can still make the college football playoff if they were going to lose to Michigan. But Ohio State, my number 2 seed. Who will play Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl here if this game were to happen, let's say, tomorrow? And I kind of made a change here with the number 3 seed. Michigan, was my number 3 seed. I got Tennessee at number 3 this weekend. I think Tennessee kind of deserves to be in this spot just because of, the wins they've had this year. Michigan had a bye week this past weekend, so it's not really their fault, for not moving down a spot. But Tennessee, I think, has impressed me enough to put them here at number 3, which they'll be playing Ohio State if this game were to happen. Tennessee has a lot of great wins this year. They're coming off some, tough games, but, Tennessee has won them all. They've beaten, some really good, decent teams. I mean, they've beaten Pittsburgh, they've beaten Florida, they also beaten, Alabama, LSU on the road. Tennessee has a lot of great wins against, some good teams. I mean, the only team that they have left, I think, is pretty good is Georgia because, Georgia obviously is really good. Tennessee does have, kind of a, trap game this weekend against Kentucky. I mean, Kentucky can run the football. If Tennessee does lose that game, they probably move down. Here are my rankings next week. But Tennessee, I think this is a playoff contender. They maybe finish 11-1 this year, maybe undefeated at 12-0. They could possibly go to the SEC championship and maybe finish out 10-2. I think that's the worst case scenario for Tennessee, for this year. Maybe 10-2 is worst case scenario. but I have them at number 3 seed. Let's go to the number 4 seed, and I just mentioned them all ago. It's Michigan. Michigan at number 4. Last week I had them at number 3. Just because how they performed against Penn State a couple weeks ago. I mean, that's the difference between Tennessee and Michigan's games. Michigan, though, really has performed pretty well this year. The offense has been pretty explosive. Michigan coming off a bye week this past weekend. They'll play Michigan State at home this weekend. That's kind of like a revenge game for Michigan as well. I mean, last year losing to Michigan State on the road, which they could have won that game, but they still made the college football playoff. Michigan could have, finished undefeated this year. But, this season is just a lot different. Michigan has just been a team to look out for in the Big Ten East. I mean, they'll still have to play Ohio State, which they can still make the college football playoff if they were still going to lose that game. Maybe Ohio State needs to lose, the Big Ten championship in order for Michigan to get in. But these are my top 4 teams right here: Georgia, Ohio State, Tennessee, and Michigan. Now we're going to make a prediction here if this game were to happen. Georgia versus Michigan is first. This is kind of like a rematch from last year's semifinal game between Georgia and Michigan. But if I was going to make a prediction, I would still go with Georgia. I mean, Georgia, obviously one of the most dangerous teams in the country right now, and the offense is just really explosive. Stetson Bennett will lead this team to a victory over Michigan. I think Michigan will be a lot closer, though, than it was last year, though, because the game last year was just obviously not that close. I mean, Georgia kept on rolling in this game against Michigan, and I think Georgia will win by a close one if this game were to happen. All right, Ohio State versus Tennessee in the Verbo Fiesta Bowl. What a matchup this would be. Ohio State versus Tennessee in the Verbo Fiesta Bowl. 2 great offensive teams. This will be a shootout. I think both teams will be scoring in the 40s in this game. It just comes down who has the better defense, and I think that better defense goes to the Buckeyes. I'm going to say that Ohio State defeats Tennessee here in the Verbo Fiesta Bowl. But Tennessee obviously going to get really close in this game. I mean, this game right here is going to be a shootout type game. I would love to see that matchup. I would love to see Tennessee versus Ohio State, maybe in a bowl game some year. I mean, you got 2 great offensive teams, and you got 2 great quarterbacks going at it. Hendon Hooker versus C.J. Stroud will be a great matchup. All right, the national championship game, Georgia versus Ohio State, just like I had it last week. I had Georgia winning it last week. Ohio State obviously beaten, Iowa this past weekend. I know Georgia's coming out of a bye week, but I still think this Georgia team is still good enough to win the national championship if this game were to happen. So I'm going to go with the Bulldogs here for another back-to-back week. And I pretty much have picked Georgia, in the last, few weeks now. I mean, I've been, choosing Georgia just because it's just based off of their performances. I think Georgia is really good enough to win the national championship if these games are to happen. But that concludes my top 4 standings for the college football playoff standings. The college football playoff, top 25 is coming out next Tuesday, November 1st. Can't wait for the college football playoff rankings to come out, and I'll give a reaction to the college football playoff rankings next week. And keep subscribing to this channel if you are new to this channel, and we're trying to get the views up. We're trying to get the subscribers up. So stay tuned here for more on the Lucas Ross Sports Channel.